Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jane Farmer, Director of the Social Innovation Research Institute at Swinburne. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar around the launch of our new report, Mapping Wellbeing from Social Enterprises, which is presented by the Social Innovation Research Institute in partnership with the Centre for Social Impact at Swinburne. You'll shortly hear from a range of speakers. And before I hand over to distinguished Professor Joe Barraket, who is going to facilitate our hour of webinar, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. I acknowledge that I'm hosting this webinar from the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters. Before I get going, a few words of housekeeping. So we really want your comments and questions. That's always the most exciting and lively part of these webinars. Please look at the Q&A box on your screen. If you think of a question at any point, just type it in there. And Joe will handle posing these questions to our speakers. Alternatively, you might want to use the raise hand button, and we'll enable your microphone then so that you can verbally ask your question. Finally, this session is being recorded and it may be published on our website and social media pages or those of our partners. So if you don't want your voice to be in the recording during the Q&A, please email our Research Events Officer, Paul Levy, at paullevy@swinburne.edu.au. We will distribute this recording to you all shortly after the session. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Joe Barraket to kick us off and facilitate the session thereafter. Joe, over to you.
Thanks, Jane, and hi everybody. The Zoom webinar model I think we've all become quite familiar with now, but it's still a bit strange being on the facilitator's end because I know there's about 90 of you here, but I can't see you at this stage. Welcome, and it's great to have you here. I'm not going to speak too much today. Those of you who know me know that I am a specialist in social enterprise and I am a member of the research team that this project is, this webinar is about. But Jane's given me the job of facilitating, which is a very good thing to do with naughty people who talk too much. You give them a job to do. So my job is to basically enable our esteemed speakers to have a chat with you. The focus, as you know, is on wellbeing, social enterprise and regional cities and disadvantage, but I'll allow our speakers to go through, and Jane in particular as the leader of the project will give you an outline of the project and the key findings. I guess I did just want to make a couple of reflections. You know, we always say there's never a better time to be talking about something, but I have to say, I'm not sure that there's ever been a more important time to be talking about the role of social enterprise in the enablement of well-being, both at the level of individuals and communities and indeed societies. Those of you who know the CSI Swinburne team know that we the largest social enterprise research centre in the world. I'm really pleased that Professor Michael Roy from Glasgow Caledonian University is here because the UNIS Centre at Glasgow Caledonian is the other really large social enterprise research centre. I won't go on too much, but just to say that in the last 24 hours alone, I've seen reports and draft reports from federal and state and statutory authorities, private research reports commissioned by philanthropy, and I've received, as I always do, a number of inquiries. And I think one of the top ticket items at the moment is what social enterprise can be doing to improve and create inclusive employment. But certainly social enterprise in regional communities does not just play an employment creation role. The other critical area that I think we're looking at a lot is the role of social enterprise and the wider social economy in community renewal and in regional innovation generally. So in the Australian context, obviously issues around the last bushfire season and COVID-19 are bringing a lot of those issues to the fore. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jane, who's going to provide an overview of the project. I won't formally introduce each speaker. Their details will be on the slides, and we've invited them to briefly introduce themselves. So over to you, Jane.
Great, thanks, Jo. So as Jo has said, I led the project, and it falls to me to give a quick overview to start with. Hopefully you all have a copy of the report as well. First of all, I'd just like to acknowledge the funding from the Australian Research Council Discovery Programme, Project Programme. Sorry, that's my shopping being delivered at this point that you can hear in the background. And all of the researchers who brought their different discipline expertise to this project. I'd especially like to thank Tracy Dakota, who collected much of the data. I'd also like to thank the social enterprises and their employees and managers who participated. Next slide, Paul. So why is this project significant? There is lots of evidence, growing evidence that social enterprises influence health and well-being. But there have been challenges in evidencing this, with many inductive qualitative studies and some quantitative studies, but they have tended to focus on single or a small number of variables. Some recent work by Aurora Elms, looking at Vanguard Laundry, has really started to change this and is another seminal project in this space. Social enterprises have to evidence their outcomes to funders, so they need to be sure of the outcomes produced and have a way to show this that will excite their funders. So we decided to get creative and work with geography to see if we could map the intangible social outcomes of social enterprise. We worked with 4 social enterprises in Victoria and Tasmanian regional cities. We collected data from observation, interviews, go-along interviews, focus groups. And we analysed all of these data, first of all, for well-being, using the spaces of well-being theory, which has the categories social integration, capability, security, and therapy. And after analysing for well-being, we then analysed all these data for location. And we used a GIS to map onto social enterprise floor plans and the cities and regions that we were looking at. And this enabled us to make microgeographies of well-being, showing where well-being occurs most or least, and through what activities. Next slide, Paul. So Chris is going to talk more about mapping in a moment, but here's just a quick taster, I guess, of what's in the report. This slide shows on the one side the basic floor plan of the social enterprise, which we call farm. And then you can see on the other side of the slide that we mapped capability, social integration, security, and therapy, where we find them occurring within the social enterprises. Now, there's much that can be said about these maps, but it's all in the report, so you'll be pleased to know that I'm not going to laboriously go through all of that. Let's just say here that you can see that key sites like the garden farm, and to a lesser extent the car wash and block room, were significant for realising well-being. Deep dives into the data show that some of the mechanisms at play here are, for example, for capability building, the potential in these spaces for diverse tasks that enable people to be seen to progress or enhance their skills as appropriate. And for social integration, some key aspects here were around the potential for group problem solving and negotiating tasks at the garden and car wash. This is a good way for people to meet new people as a byproduct of purposeful activity, build trust and relationships. Thus, building up these maps enabled us not just to understand where well-being realised, but as I say, to get underneath this data and understand how well-being realised. And this enabled us to build the tools and checklists that you can find in the report. Next slide, Paul. We also looked at social enterprise and communities in the regional cities that we looked at. And again, a number of different maps were developed. And this map, for example, shows where business was being done via the social enterprise in relation to CFA disadvantage profile. We also looked at aspects like the relationship between the social enterprises and bonding and bridging social capital within the regional cities. Generally, at the community level, we find that social enterprises benefit the communities by providing spaces of connection where people from diverse backgrounds can meet, by promoting the capability of people with different vulnerabilities and showing them in strong roles within the community, by providing niche products and services, and overall their bridging and linking activity with other organisations generates a web of socio-economic benefits. Next, Paul. The project successfully found out where and how wellbeing is realised through social enterprises, and it produced multiple academic outputs and a book which is on the way, and multiple tools for practice as included in the report. And we're also almost about ready with our interactive website, which will be launching imminently in partnership with the Centre for Social Impact's other social enterprise and wellbeing projects. So that's just a very quick overview of some of the findings that are in the report. I'm now going to hand over to Jo to introduce the next speaker.
Thanks, Jane. And there was a bit of question in the chat function about where the report was, and the online link's now been provided. Thanks to both Jo and Rhonda for leaping in there. I was madly searching around online. We're now going to hear from Dr. Chris Brennan-Horley from the University of Wollongong, who's also a member of the research team. And as Jane's described, this is an interesting interdisciplinary project involving a lot of what I find extremely exciting data visualization using geographic methods. And Chris is our lead map guru. And so over to you, Chris.
Thanks so much, Jo. Yes, so I'm Chris, I'm the mapping guy, and I was really brought into this project to help us think about how maps might help us understand the where of well-being. So maps helped us to do two things. First, to generate information, and second, to visualize and make sense of our findings. Now, on the data generation side, we used maps to sketch out and make notes about the tasks, the activities, and the everyday movements our participants were making while at work. An example is here for you on the left-hand side of the slide. And this worked quite well for us, both within buildings and outside across wider sites. So the maps therefore have a bit of agency. They anchored our observations and discussions about otherwise amorphous concepts like well-being or security or integration in the everyday spaces, the activities and the flows of social enterprise work. But we also use tactile printed maps to try and ground truth or check our findings. Now, during this phase, the maps supported our participants to replay their activities and discuss feelings about particular work sites. So during these focus groups, a printed map of the social enterprise permitted staff and workers of all abilities to gather around and engage with the important task of checking our findings. Next slide, please, Paul. So we ended up with a mix of data. We had participant observation, we had interviews and focus groups. And then one way to try and make sense of it all was to try and map out with a GIS where all those wellbeing intensities occurred. But like Jane always likes to say, if you're going to map it, can you make it 3D, please? So I went ahead and did that. And what this process revealed to us are these kind of landscapes of wellbeing. So we have mountains rising up in varying intensities across our study sites from what would otherwise be a flat two-dimensional map. Now, 3D topographies aren't just a cartographic gimmick, they're actually an engaging and incredibly fast way to convey intensity in a data distribution. Much like how we all can easily make sense of landscapes going by as we look out the car window, our intuitive understandings of depth and height help us to quickly make sense of where wellbeing generation was most intense. Now, the next question is of course then, well, why are peaks occurring in different parts of our different sites? And that's of course linked closely to the sorts of tasks that take place at those various locations. And I'll direct you to the report which delves into those underlying explanations and the wellbeing factors that were generated both outside and inside buildings. But just before we move to the next slide, I want you to take note of those two instances where the delivery zones scored quite highly for wellbeing. These were locations where journeys beyond the social enterprise began. Next slide, please, Paul. So moving on from mapping landscapes of wellbeing on the grounds of social enterprises, we also looked into what network cartographies might offer for visualising off-site linkages. And here we see various networks winding and shooting their way out into the local community and beyond. Now, these came from looking at the delivery records and logs of off-site work that social enterprises undertook in an average month, as well as interviews with staff and workers about their interactions with external organisations and customers. Now, these maps show social enterprises as deeply enmeshed in local and regional economies, providing services that are highly valued by local customers. And being able to map out the spread and intensity of delivery networks, like in that purple one on the bottom right, and let's visually demonstrate and appreciate the importance of social procurement for social enterprise success. But these aren't just maps of deliveries or journeys to a job site, they're maps of opportunities for further wellbeing generation. For some disadvantaged workers, their everyday activity space, so the amount of space they can roam around on in any given day, was actually enhanced as they travelled around and had increased opportunities to mix with a variety of different groups in the wider community. Bonding, bridging and linking networks that comprise social capital could also be mapped out, revealing a geography of proximate and regional relationships. Workers realise wellbeing benefits through networking, building social skills and increasing their self-confidence as employees on the move. So the takeaway from these network maps is that they visually unbound the social enterprise, revealing it instead not as a bounded space, but as a networked and relational entity built up of diverse and reciprocal relationships that have wellbeing potential. Now, across these last couple of slides, we've seen that mapping and cartography have really aided us on this project to reveal previously hidden geographies of wellbeing that are both networked and site-specific. And we hope that this report then helps other enterprises to think spatially about their operations and opportunities for wellbeing generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And for those of you particularly interested in social procurement, we're writing that particular part of the work up right now. I think what you're seeing in this work is really digging into the how. I think there's a relatively decent body of literature now that shows that social enterprises of different forms create wellbeing, but what you see in this micro and spatial analysis is some of the hows that I think are kind of have not been fully articulated by social entrepreneurs themselves, and certainly not in the academic literature. And now we have the privilege of hearing from a practice perspective. So this project is funded by the Australian Research Council Discovery Program, which is traditionally a pure basic research program where there's no requirement to be explicitly in partnership with practitioners in the design and implementation of the research. But we at the Social Innovation Research Institute and CSI Swinburne wouldn't do it any other way. And we're really pleased to have Donna here to give us her insights from the Tasmanian perspective about some of the practice implications of this research. So over to you, Donna.
Thanks, Jo. So Donna Bain, I'm a General Manager of Selfhelp Workplace. So just to put us in context, we're a small Australian disability enterprise in Launceston. We currently employ 55 adults with a disability, and we're mission driven. So our job is to provide our employees with meaningful and productive employment so they can enjoy independent and fulfilling lives. And we do that by essentially running a medium-sized social enterprise. So 2/3 of our income is actually generated from the commercial goods and services that we make. And you can see the list of those on the slides. A third comes from NDIS funding, so our participant plans, and the remaining 10% comes from grants, donations and memberships. So essentially our reason for getting up in the morning is to provide people with disability with meaningful and productive employment. And we were really keen to participate in the research because we are all about the people, and the reason our business exists is to essentially support people with disability. So it's really important to understand their experience in the enterprise and their experience in the community. So next slide, if you wouldn't mind, Paul. So in terms of the mapping exercise that happened at Selfhelp Workplace, because of time, I just want to focus on two things in particular. One was the notion of security and the second one around therapy. It was really interesting to note that supervisors' offices came up as a really strong area of security. For people who aren't familiar with our enterprise, spending time in a supervisor's office might have the feel of being in the principal's office and all of that involved, but in fact the research didn't bear that out. The research found that participants found spending time in supervisors' offices to be safe and secure because it's there. They can have conversation not only about the things that are happening at work, but also the things that are happening in the personal lives. And we know that those conversations are private and respectful, and it's really about a really safe dialogue between supervisors and staff. So it was really pleasing to see that that experience is borne out by our supported employees and our staff. One of the things that shouldn't have surprised us but did was the amount of time that employees spend in the toilets and why they do that, because it was identified as a place of therapy. And when we thought about it, of course, it made perfectly good sense. People with disability live, on the whole, very crowded lives. They might still live at home, even as old as their 50s and 60s with elderly parents. If they're not living at home, they might be living in supported accommodation with other people with disability. There are carers in their lives for almost 24/7 for a lot of them. So there aren't many places, I imagine, in their personal life at home where they actually get to be by themselves. And of course, when they come to the workplace, that's all duplicated again because they're in the canteen and their workstations. So the toilets are a place of quietness. You get to be alone, you get to close the door, you get to ignore everybody else and they can't see you. So what we have been attempting to do over the last few months is try and find other places which are more comfortable, where employees might be able to spend some time being by themselves and having that really precious quiet time, which I think we all really value. So that's one of the other things that we're going to pursue with this project. And just moving on to my last slide around one of the reasons why we participate in this project, and we get lots of approaches for research, and my staff groan every time I nominate us for something. But one of the reasons we're really keen to participate in this one is because the researchers spent serious amounts of time with my supported employees. So people with disability often don't have a voice and they are rarely heard. And what the researchers did was spend time with them. They sat next to them, watched the work that they did, worked alongside of them. They caught up with them at lunchtime. They went with them on deliveries, and they caught up with them on the weekend to find out what these guys do when they're not at work. So found out more about them, more about their lives, what makes them tick, what makes them happy, what makes them not happy. And I think that really quiet, respectful conversation was the hallmark of this project, which is why we learned so much about their experience at Selfhelp Workplace. And the other thing, of course, the research confirmed was that, and we always felt this instinctively, that we consider Selfhelp Workplace to be a community asset. We are part of the DNA of the Greater Launceston area, and the research bore that out. So it really creates a sense of obligation on us to make sure that we use resources wisely. It's a position of trust that the community holds with us. And we're really keen to make sure that we continue to do that, because Selfhelp Workplace is one of 165 disability enterprises in Australia, employing some 21,000 people. So we're a big part of local communities and regional economies. And I think there's a really strong place for us going forward in this post-COVID recovery. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Donna. It's really great. I mean, obviously as researchers, it's gratifying when people we seek to serve say that the research has been useful, but it's so great to hear that there was something unexpected and that you've also changed something as a result of that. That means that we've done our jobs well, and definitely under the fearless leadership of Jane, this is the kind of work that we do. And also, I guess, just picking up on your final comment there about being part of the DNA of Launceston and the regional economy, I think that that's one of the things that a lot of the work that we do, and our next speaker does, is, you know, trying to render visible all the forms of caring economy and social economy work that occur almost beneath the surface. You know, we look at the visible dominant conversations, but actually there's a hell of a lot of economy that goes on underneath the waves of the iceberg. So that gives us a good opportunity to segue to Professor Michael Roy from Glasgow Caledonian University. And I want to particularly thank Michael for being here. It's just past 7 in the morning where he is, and he's gotten up very early and is imbibing a lot of coffee in order to do this. Michael is a world-leading researcher on social enterprise and health and well-being, and also a partner investigator on this project. And because he's international, we've given him the job of reflecting on international implications from this project, but he might also have some other things to say. Over to you, Michael. You have to unmute yourself, Michael.
I do. I'm sorry about that, Jo. Good morning, everyone. Or good afternoon. I'm Michael Roy, Professor of Economic Sociology and Social Policy at the Eunice Centre for Social Business and Health at Glasgow Caledonian University, which is in Scotland in the UK. And I apologise if I don't make much sense because it is just after 7 o'clock in the morning here. So I've been asked to give some international perspectives on the relevance of this research from an international perspective, but as Jo says, I may well creep into other areas in the 5 minutes that I have. I just wanted to express my thanks, first of all, for being invited to join this fantastic project team in the first place, and to everyone involved, particularly the practitioners, for the really fascinating experiences and learning that I gained from everybody, both before, during and after the project. As Jo says, I've been working in this particular area on the health and wellbeing impacts of social enterprises for close on to a decade now. I've just realised as I was writing this, so 2020 represents the 10th anniversary of the establishment of the Eunice Centre for Social Business and Health, and I think we've come a long way over that time. Up to the end of 2018, we were running a large-scale 5-year project called Common Health, which was funded by Research Councils UK, which is the UK equivalent of the ARC. So the project was really groundbreaking in its way, focusing as it did on the health and wellbeing impacts of social enterprises and establishing methods to assess social enterprises as a form of public health intervention. We don't really like that intervention word, but that's the word that's used in public health. And we were drawing on tools and techniques from public health, but really nobody was talking about social enterprises in that way before. But that particular project, if truth be told, caused me some frustrations, particularly this is because we barely moved beyond the conceptualization phase of theory building. So in other words, we came up with a series of kind of plausible explanations for why doing certain things in certain social enterprises produce certain outcomes under certain conditions. And we explored a whole heap of different contexts. We focused on different groups, all with different needs, from older people through to homeless people, to people in fragile rural communities, through to urban communities, through to working with young people, people working in arts and crafts or on local economic development initiatives. However, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most successful outcomes of that previous project was what it represented. It was kind of the first of its kind. It shifted the conversation, the role of social enterprises in supporting well-being. But ultimately, the project helped to provide a kind of small piece of inspiration for this one you're hearing about today, to which I was proud to play a small but perfectly formed, albeit slightly rotund, part. The real added value of this project internationally is a geographical focus as far as I'm concerned. So drawing on different theories of well-being, particularly spaces of well-being theory, drawing on tools and methods, the maps and data visualization tools, for example, the well-being intensities that you saw from Chris. So in other words, we're looking at tools that are able to deal with the role of place and space in generating well-being in a very visual and compelling way, and how and the extent to which social enterprises are enmeshed in local economies, interact with others, and spill well-being benefits into local communities. So moving from individual to community to societal well-being. Now that's really cutting edge stuff. It's really raised the bar in terms of social enterprise scholarship. Hand on heart, I can honestly say that in this project, we really pushed the boundaries of social enterprise scholarship in ways that no one could possibly have predicted. in ways that are the bleeding edge of social science scholarship, never mind just on the topic of social enterprise. But I also know, again, that we've just scratched the surface. There's still loads more to do, loads more work to keep us busy in the future. I am, however, absolutely keen that we maintain momentum, that we continue to build and maintain and grow our international collaborations. And as Joe said from the outset, in terms of the timing of all this, new questions emerge posed by the times that we find ourselves living in. So, for example, does what we found here stack up or resonate with Global South, for example, and or in places where the welfare context is very different? Post-COVID-19, how are these spaces of well-being maintained or affected if we bring physical distancing into the equation, for example? What can social enterprise do to help us shift to what we call well-being economy, an economy focused on the health of the health and well-being of people on the planet, rather than maximising GDP, for example? But anyway, I'm keen to find out. That's more or less it from me. I'm more than happy to answer any questions, but I hope I made some sense. It's almost time for breakfast here, and I don't make much sense in the morning at the best of times. So thanks very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Michael. And you know, it's always great when one researcher says to some other researchers, there's still a lot more research to do, because our quest for relevance is continual, particularly in the Australian political context right now. But also, I think some of the questions that you posed, I know that you did that rhetorically, but they're important questions, some of which we might dig into, but I think are really part of a wider research agenda, as you've indicated. Just a reminder to you all that now is your opportunity to ask some questions or provide a comment if you wish. You have multiple ways of doing it. You can put your hand up through the participants function. You could type a question into the chat function or into the Q&A function. Because I've got 3 different streams here, hopefully you can just bear with me. Apologies, you can hear my dog barking. Hopefully you can just bear with me. Your comments, or I'm going to have to flip between screens to check your comments and questions. I've got one question already from Rowan, which was on how is disadvantage understood in the context of this project? How is it measured or determined? I'll flip that to Jane first.
I saw that question coming in and I thought, oh, that Rowan Bedgood, what is she like? Yeah, look, the others can correct me if they think I'm wrong here, but I don't think we specifically measured disadvantage. I think that we, I guess we looked at disadvantage kind of has different levels of relevance here. So the suburbs in which the social enterprises were located in the cities were the more disadvantaged suburbs in those cities. I guess we viewed the employees, participants, workers, whatever we want to call the social enterprise workers, as often kind of experiencing complex or kind of multiple disadvantages. I'm not sure about the word disadvantage, as I think it's somewhat stigmatizing, but let's just bear with it for now since it was in the title of our report. Yeah, in that most people across the social enterprises experienced a combination of either physical or cognitive less capable. Some people experienced mental ill health, and generally people experienced forms of socioeconomic disadvantage and poverty, in fact. So that was really how disadvantage was construed. It wasn't that we kind of measured individuals. I hope that answers the question to some extent.
There you go. Rowan's just let you off the hook. She's nodding and saying, thank you, Jane.
Good, thank you. Thank you for letting me off the hook.
I haven't got too many questions. Oh, here we go. Here's one from Leanne Barnes. How do you plan to get these out, get the tools and findings out there, particularly those useful for planning to start a new social enterprise? What's our plan for dissemination? And I'm going to very briefly apologise and go and get my dog out of this room so she stops barking, but keep going.
Go for it. Well, I can have a little go, I guess. Leanne, I know that you're in Tasmania, so maybe you could look up Donna at some point, since you guys are free and not in lockdown. Look, I think we've done, as part of the project, we did a number of talks and showcases in the different settings. So we worked with UTAS and Donna and Denise in Launceston to do a bit of a showcase last year. Michael came over from Scotland. We've also done the same in Bendigo. We have presented at a number of forums. We also have a website in preparation, facilitated by the awesome Tracy Dakota. And on that website, we have a sort of virtual enactment or reenactment or animation, where you can actually scan a sort of virtual social enterprise, and there's like pop-ups where you can click on them and see the relationship between the well-being being generated and the different activities that are going on there. So we, I think, have kind of pushed the boat out a little bit in terms of different media to get our findings across. But as with all of these projects, I mean, the challenge is to get the information out as widely as possible. And obviously working with Centre for Social Impact is really crucial here, because they have such a great kind of network across Australia. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that.
I just thought I'd quickly add, just so people know it's coming. We've been funded by the Victorian Government and the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation to create a social innovation evidence portal, which will be a one-stop shop, we hope, for research evidence, both applied and scholarly, about social enterprise and social innovation, aspects of social innovation and the social enterprise ecosystem. It's been initiated by me for CSI Swinburne, but it won't be owned by CSI Swinburne. We want it to sit in the Creative Commons, and 7 Australian universities have put their hands up to help host that site. So we'll have more to say about that in about 3 months' time. We're just doing the build at the moment. I could see several questions have come in. Gabrielle O'Kane's asked for some good papers on spaces of wellbeing theory, Jane.
Oh man, sorry, I've just responded to someone else's. Look, look, obviously we've written some papers in that shameless self-citation way that academics have, but we have written a number of papers on the back of this project. There is the Spaces of Wellbeing kind of theory paper, I guess, by Fleury and Atkinson, 2007. It's actually strangely in the New Zealand Geographer. I think that's because theory papers sometimes are challenged to get published in peer-reviewed journals. But we can certainly, I don't know if Tracy might be on this, could post the reference to that in the chat. Yeah, and there have been a number of papers that have used spaces of wellbeing theory thereafter. I think ours is probably the most significant one that has actually converted the theory into a sort of mechanism for measuring or quantifying, or at least assessing well-being. Oh, you're on mute, Joe.
Thank you. I'm not going to go in the order in which questions have been delivered, because I want to make sure everyone gets to say something. So I'm going to go to Mikey's question and maybe direct that to Donna and Michael in the first instance. What are your comments on the pandemic effect in terms of physical spaces of wellbeing and the importance of the virtual complementing to that? So Donna, it'd probably be good to hear from you in terms of the people that your organisation serves, as well as obviously any general thoughts you have about it. But you know, we're obviously facing a pretty strange time in terms of the physical and the virtual.
So a couple of things. We were very fortunate that we were able to stay open through the entire COVID emergency. So the business was able to, we turned our lights on and came to work every day and got the work done. For the employees who were still able to come to work, so about 18 at the peak of the emergency were away, either self-isolating because of their own health or the health of their carers or their living arrangements. The feedback we got from those who were able to come was that they were eternally grateful that in this time of significant change and disruption, there was something which was constant. And that was the feedback we also had from carers, because community access programs were stopped. They couldn't go swimming, they couldn't go walking, and there was a whole bunch of stuff they couldn't do. It was incredibly distressing for people who depend on routine for their wellbeing. Coming to work was this one consistent place. And it's been interesting watching employees return to work, because all of them are now back, really relieved to be back at work. Social distancing has been a bit tricky, managing a few roster issues, trying to keep the distances apart. But one of the things we have devised over the period was activities to keep the employees connected whilst they were away. It was really important for us to make sure they didn't lose the connection to work, and for them to appreciate that we still wanted them, that we still value them as employees and look forward to having them back. So we sent home activity packs every week for all the employees who were away, which was around reinforcing some work skills, some life skills, having some fun and remaining connected. So we had to work really hard to get that done, but it was part of our commitment to maintain that connection. And it was a really important part of our COVID story, and continues to be. We're working on a whole bunch of projects at the moment to build that online capacity and connection.
Fantastic. Thanks, Donna. And Michael, have you got any comments on this, you know, the interface between the physical and the virtual and wellbeing, and how it might all play out while we continue to be somewhat constrained, although I realise it's different in different jurisdictions?
It is, but to be honest, it's common to all societies, really, this notion of well-being. It doesn't just... Well-being is often your interactions with other people, and of course there is a big physical dimension to that. You know, in ways we hug each other, we shake hands, you know, and all that kind of thing. We support each other through non-verbal thing, and all of that has been upset because of the well, I've been pushing back on the narrative of social distancing, because I don't think that language helps, and I think we need to move to a language of physical distancing and kind of social solidarity, if you like. But certainly the physical distancing really has upset well-being in ways that we don't fully understand as yet. I actually think that that's going to be, and I've noticed as well that even as lockdown has eased, particularly in the UK, we're now much more wary than we were before about physical interactions. So I think there may well be a hangover from that, and I don't know whether it's going to last forever, but it's certainly going to last for the foreseeable future. We might have to retrain ourselves to be more physical with people. And I think that may well have of well-being implications that basically, it begs several questions, I think, research questions for us that we really should be looking at in the future. Thank you.
I might just quickly go to Chris and then we'll come back to the questions. But Chris, you know, given the question about the geographic references and spaces of well-being, etc., is there any other, I mean, you know, Michael's talked about how leading edge this is, and you're a head mapper, so you're at the leading edge of you're at the bleeding edge of the leading edge. But is there any other resources you'd like to recommend to people that are operating in this space, but maybe not specifically around social enterprise?
Yeah, look, I just want to basically just dumb it all down, okay? Like, you don't have to, like, it's taken me years to build up the GIS training to do and make those maps, but to think spatially about your social enterprise and how it sits in your community, it can be very basic. You can use an online format like Google Maps to drop pins on a map to look at distributions that way. You could even just use a paper map on the wall and be drawing upon that, because we're all innate spatial thinkers. We can all see patterns in data. We can all do this. So you don't want to get too caught up in this idea that it has to be really fandangled and fancy like I went and did with this project, which was fun, and that's what I like to do. But I think, yeah, starting off on some of the tools that we've got in the report, and also what will be on the website, just to think in that spatial kind of framework is definitely the way to go. And then if you want to branch out even further, I recommend just starting with Google Earth and learning about geographic data and adding lines and points to a map is really the best place to start.
Thank you, Chris. I'm just going to go back to a question from Bill Guy. And I'll answer it because I know the answer. So what's the possibility or opportunity for a stimulus package for social enterprises with a particular focus on long-term unemployed in the October budget in high unemployment areas across Australia? I guess what I would say to that, Bill, is we've always had patchy public policy recognition around social enterprise and the wider social economy in Australia. The current federal government's focus pre-COVID has been on growing the market for social impact investing, which somewhat intersects with social enterprise, but really not as much as I think everyone presumes, because the large majority of social enterprises are micro, small and medium enterprises. That said, there is a new alliance and there's several people on this, I can see on this webinar, who form part of an Australian conglomeration of all of the state-based social enterprise practitioner networks. It's called ASENA, and if I say that what the acronym stands for, I'll get it wrong, but it's basically the Australian Social Enterprise Network. And ASENA is developing up a proposal for a full federal social enterprise strategy. So there's certainly work being done at all levels, and I'm certainly behind the scenes also trying to do some work around this. I think while social enterprise is not only about employment by a long shot, there is no question that across this project and also another project that we're doing on youth health equity and social enterprise, you can see the effects of inclusive employment being very strongly represented in social enterprise, and there's much to be learned from them by mainstream employers. There's a few questions about are we aware of various measurement tools such as employee wellbeing measurement platforms such as Culture Amp. Is there international standards in terms of metrics and indices to measure the social impact of an organisation, and particularly in the areas of wellbeing? Jane, do you want to take that question on, or that cluster of questions?
Well, you're probably much more familiar with the actual standard tools. I guess we find the spaces of well-being was like a theory that actually really resonated when applied, which was one of the kind of, I don't know, standout sort of almost shocks for me from the whole thing, was like that that the components, the social integration, capability and security really resonated with what was going on in the social enterprises. And obviously they're interconnected and combine. The therapy side of things was, I guess, was kind of an interesting one, and less, there was sort of less data about that. And I kind of wonder if that was more to do with the fact that they were work-oriented enterprises. And so I think that's something to be looked at in future. I know obviously there are multiple kind of indices and different ways of construing well-being, but as I say, I think we sort of landed on the Flurry and Atkinson because they had done a fairly intensive review of the literature in relation to how you would use it in a spatial way. So that's really where we were coming from here.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. And I think that's, you've nailed it. I mean, the questions, there's a whole webinar, or 12 really, on metrics and tools for measuring all forms of social impact. And I guess the observation to make is that academics take a critically informed approach to these things. My own observation is that the underlying taxonomies really matter, and that's one of the things that I think we've really collectively struggled with. So there's some very nice shiny tools out there. They look fabulous, but if you dig down to look at the underlying logics about how impact's being conceived, they're often fairly thin in my experience. There are some academic efforts to try and pull together different approaches to social impact measurement and different indicators. So the CSI one is called Amplify, and that's led out of CSI UNSW. At CSI Swinburne, not in competition with UNSW, but as a complement, we're developing the Social Enterprise Impact Lab, and that should be in Beta Plus in about 6 weeks' time. And these are tools. Also, there's the UTS Social Impact measurement toolbox. They're all tools that have sought to bring together different kinds of indicators and benchmarks so that practitioners can make sense of the diversity and also use things that have already been validated rather than trying to create their own. I'm going to a question for Michael Roy from the always cheeky Rachel Taylor, who's my PhD candidate, so I get to say that. And this is important to Rachel's PhD, Michael, has this project changed or expanded your model of social enterprise wellbeing?
And she also wants me to say Denny Fash Sassenach, apparently. Yeah. I don't know.
Thank you, you did that, well done.
Well, thank you. Yes, is a simple answer to that question.
So now Rachel needs to know how, because she's using your framework as part of her thesis.
She's using the framework, the 2014 framework that was published in Social Science and Medicine, etc. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's precisely what that was for, basically to say this is just a starting point. Not everybody will be familiar with that work, but essentially what we did was we looked at the a hypothetical theory of change, I suppose, in terms of engaging with social enterprise through to the types of social enterprise, the kind of mediating variables, in other words, what they do, and then the various outcomes, or intermediate outcomes, if you like. So in terms of self-confidence, in terms of the social determinants of health, physical health, mental health, and then how they then subsequently lead through to improvements in health and well-being and an ultimate, as the ultimate goal, if you like, of social enterprises. So really, this brings a whole spatial dimension to that. In other words, it's a very flat kind of way of looking at things. It's very unidirectional. It goes from left to right. And of course, wellbeing generation is far more circuitous. I've also spoken about the interactions between people. It's iterative and therefore is much more dynamic. So I think that this brings out that flat kind of spatial, thinking out of things in 2 dimensions into 3 dimensions. I know I'm not explaining this very well at all, but all I'm saying is that it brings an extra dimension of realism to and reality to the whole process of wellbeing generation. And I actually think that is really exciting work, and somehow aligning the tools and methods that have been used in public health for many, many years and bringing them into the realm of social enterprise, which is actually still a fairly underdeveloped in many ways, methodologically speaking anyway, field or subfield, but then augmenting them with some really cutting edge tools from geography that Chris has outlined in detail. I think those have really expanded my appreciation and understanding of wellbeing generation. So sorry that was very rushed, but I hope you get a lot of Denny Fash Sassenach kind of whatever.
You're very apologetic in the mornings, Michael. Thanks, Richard Osborne, for putting up the Alliance of Australian Social Enterprise Networks link for people who are interested. And I want to go to one last question and then we'll round things out. And I can't remember where I saw it, but I noticed it because it was from Joe Farmer. And yes, there is a common point there, and I can't see where the question is, but a very good question. Did the research findings actually challenge the theoretical frameworks in any ways? Well, you know, have we extended theory? What have we done, Jane?
Oh, children. You shouldn't have them. That is a really good question. Chris might want to have more to say about this, but I guess sort of tying it together with what Michael said and putting it in a practical space, because I think that a theory is wondrous, but my sort of penchant in life is to take theory and kind of go, how can this make practice? How can it help practice? And I think one of the tools that we have in the report, and one of the things that I really liked about working with the geographers was that you can actually kind of pull apart what is it, the practices, what is it about physical space, what is it about what people say, and what is it about the kind of work that's going on that actually all together kind of contribute to well-being. So this kind of whole kind of relational idea. So I suppose if there's something that I think is really quite funky about this, it's kind of taking that thing that was quite sort of lived in a theoretical world and kind of went, okay, well, let's apply this now for practice benefit. And I think, having presented this at the American Association of Geographers, I think there was a little bit of a shock from the geographers. You know, wasn't quite purist geography enough, but it's kind of like, you know, taking that theory and kind of using it for practical benefit is kind of what I like doing. And I think this project was a really great example of doing that.
Thanks, Jane. And just so you know, Jo's saying she's sorry for being cheeky. No, it's a very good question. I would add also in a social enterprise sort of, you know, conceptual space. I think, as I flagged earlier on, what this sort of work is doing is getting into the micro foundations of how things happen. And whether it's social enterprise or other forms of civil society or social economy, I think we really need to unpack that, because there's this almost kind of, I mean, you know, you get an almost a sense of evangelism around, you know, social enterprise achieves X. Well, I mean, obviously everyone on this webinar would know that not every social enterprise does achieve X, but more importantly, if you want to actually extend the secret sauce, if you want to scale the impact, you need to know the how, not just the what. And that's what this work does, which is, you know, and in doing so actually challenges some theoretical presumptions quite profoundly, I would say. I think that's a great round of questions and interaction from everyone. Thanks for all your thoughts and questions. If you've got further ideas, I'd recommend that you reach out to the relevant panelists. If you're, you know, I'm sure that some of them will be willing to speak to you. Most of us love it when people approach us about things that we said. And I'll hand back to Jane to have the last word, because this really is her project leadership. But just before I do that, I do just want to say, for those of you who are interested in this broad topic area, we'll be running a digital forum on another Australian Research Council project that I lead, that Jane is part of, which is on youth health equity and social enterprise, and that is coming up in mid-October. If you haven't already received an invitation for it and you're not on the CSI mailing list, just email either CSI National or CSI Swinburne, and we'll put you on the mailing list. But that will be another interesting panel and reflections. So Jane, over to you for the final word.
Okay, thanks so much, Jo, and thanks to everyone. It truly has been a multi-transdisciplinary project where the best of everything, I think, has come together. Thanks very much to Michael for getting up early. Thanks so much to Donna for being one of our awesome hosts and participants and co-designers. And as Jo said, we always do want to support and you know, show interest and help anyone else who might be interested in this work. So do get in touch. And just thank you all for your great questions. Thanks very much and goodbye.
Bye. Have a good day, Michael.